My mom was born Dena Marie Ames on August 23rd, 1966. Yep, her name was pronounced Dena, but spelled Deni. Later in life, it was probably useful to be able to tell the difference between telemarketers and people who were actually calling for my mom on the landline. My goal is to share this as I remember it, so details might get a little mixed up. Maybe my Aunt Brenda or Grandma Margie could help fill in the gaps. My mom was the youngest of 4 kids. Her oldest brother had died just a few weeks after birth, then her sister Brenda, and my Uncle Randy, who had passed away just a couple months ago. My grandfather was a recovering alcoholic, but I get the impression that my mom was definitely a daddy's girl. Growing up, I believe my mom was an incredibly lovable kid by the way my Grandma Margie talks about her, and that never changed. She was always compassionate and caring, but did struggle with confidence and self-esteem quite a bit. And that's probably what prompted all the trouble she had with the boys. I assume she had just turned 15 when she had met my dad. I don't know the exact timelines, but the way she told the story is that they were absolutely in love and wanted to get married. At 15 years old, for crying out loud. Apparently, my mom's family and my dad's family didn't necessarily see eye to eye, and they didn't want them to be together. Apparently, there were some social or class differences between the two families. In a fit of impulsive, misguided teenage rebellion, I, Sean Ames, was the result. They had assumed that if they got pregnant, then their families would make them get married. And that didn't work. Over the next year, my mom and dad's relationship dwindled, and eventually my dad, who was just 17 years old, mind you, was out of the picture. My now 16-year-old mom dropped out of high school to take care of me and lived with her parents. At some point in the next couple of years, my mom met her first husband, Damon. They eventually got married and brought my little sister into the world. Damon was a good guy, although they were still just kids and probably liked to party a little too much. Overall, life was pretty stable for a while. We had all moved to Quincy, where Damon went to a tech school and my mom got licensed as a beautician. After that, we came back to Moberly, where my mom eventually opened her own beauty salon called The Personal Touch by Dena Marie. The building her little shop was in actually still stood until last month when they tore it down to build the new Domino's in Moberly. Nonetheless, me being so young when they got married, I actually thought Damon was my dad for several years and even went by Sean Kitchen for a while in school. In the first grade or so, I started to figure out that my mom and dad didn't know each other when I was born, and eventually figuring out the process in which babies are made, I knew something wasn't quite adding up. After about 6 years or so, my mom and Damon ended up getting a divorce. And I assumed for financial reasons, mom shut down the salon and kind of hopped from job to job for a while. Wanting a change, my mom, sister, and I moved to St. Charles, where we lived with my Aunt Brenda over the summer of 1993. My mom got a job in a mailroom in St. Louis, and eventually we even got our own apartment in St. Charles. We actually lived right by where the casino is in St. Charles now. I'm not sure why, but before Christmas of that year, we ended up moving back to Moberly, where my mom started dating and eventually moved in with my biological father. That lasted for a while until it ended fairly abruptly. The 3 of us moved into my grandmother's tiny house, and my mom hopped from job to job for a while before she landed a factory job in Columbia. Oddly enough, from my perspective, that $7 or $8 an hour job was a huge turning point of stability in my mom's life. Probably related to her age and maturity, but she was finally able to put her incredible drive and powerful work ethic to use in a way that she would get noticed and move up through the ranks. This would have been around 7th grade for me, which would have made her right at 29 or 30 years old. She had rented a small house on Haggard Street, and our backyard was essentially in the parking lot of 2 different bars. Obviously not the best neighborhood, but still we had our own home versus living with someone else. Around this same time, my mom started dating her second husband, Scott. And at 12 years old, I didn't really know all the details, but essentially Scott was a railroader who had my mom in Moberly and a family in Iowa. Eventually he divorced his first wife and married my mom when I was in the 9th grade. They bought a house at the end of Logan Street, and from my perspective as a kid, we were finally rich. My mom continued to shine in her new work environment, and through time became the supervisor of the quality control department at the factory. Mom's marriage to Scott didn't last long, and toward the end of my sophomore year, they separated and eventually divorced. My grandmother's small house that was barely large enough for my mom and 2 small kids was definitely not large enough for us as teenagers. Sarah stayed with her dad or with our other grandparents, and mom borrowed a motorhome that we actually parked in Rothwell Park at the campground for a few weeks until we found a place to live. I think this was one of the hardest moments for my mom because she felt like she was letting my sister and me down. To the contrary, that summer marked the moment that my mom started to become my hero. Probably related to my age and my maturity, I began to recognize all the continual sacrifice she made for us as a family. Within a few weeks, we were able to rent a duplex over at Sterling Price, where my mom gave my sister and I both our own room, and she slept on a daybed in the living room. Around this time, I met Christy, and her mom was able to help us find a home to purchase here in town of our own. I believe this was a very proud moment for my mom, as she finally had a home that was ours, and no one could ever kick us out of it. We all lived there for several years until I moved out after high school. My mom continued to work hard and provide for my sister, and even bought herself a new Miata she was super proud of. My sister ended up moving out as well, and there was my mom with a great income in her late 30s, with grown kids and her entire life ahead of her. She was totally fine with being a sub-40-year-old grandmother and couldn't wait. Unfortunately, in the spring of 2004, she started getting sick, and just a couple weeks before Christy and I had gotten married, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. She was in incredible pain at our wedding, but was so proud. She had always made it a point to tell Christy she could do better. But I believe that was her way of being proud of who I was going to spend my life with. We even got to cram into her tiny little Miata to drive away from the ceremony. Christy and I had accepted a job as youth pastors near Peoria, and even though she was fighting her sickness, she was able to come and spend time with us, helping us paint and remodel our youth building. While she stayed with us in our tiny 2-bedroom apartment, she actually slept on that same daybed that she had bought so many years prior and eventually gave to me. Over the next year, she continued to fight while her faith exploded into a beautiful relationship with Christ. Every week, she would personally invite carloads of people to church with her, and she told me on more than one occasion that she was happy to exploit her sickness in that way. She would tell me that her friends and family desperately needed to know Jesus. I don't think she was ever ready to die and absolutely never gave up, but in that last year of her life, I believe she found herself. She realized her beautiful boldness and found her confidence. She would be 50 years old today, and I just wanted to take this chance to say I love you, and I miss you, and every day more and more, I realize all that you did on our behalf.